Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on working in tech. It's not just for computational linguists. I'm David Robinson, the Director of Membership and Meetings for the Linguistic Society of America. Right now, you'll see on your screens a short slideshow about the LSA and what we do. If you're not already a member, you'll see a special discount membership offer for attendees of the webinar. You'll also see that this webinar is being captioned, and if you'd like to follow along, you'll need to open up the captioning in a separate window, and I've provided a link for you to do this. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes to allow the rest of the attendees to log in, and we'll be starting in just a few minutes then, so thanks again. Okay, thanks everyone again, and let's go ahead and get started. I am David Robinson, the Director of Membership and Meetings for the Linguistic Society of America, and welcome to this webinar on working in tech. It's not just for computational linguists. You'll see on your screens a short slideshow about the LSA and what we do, and if you're not already a member, you'll see a special discount offer you can take advantage of. Also, this webinar is being captioned, and you'll see a link to do this on the introductory slide of the presentation. So again, thank you all for joining us. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Anna Trester. She's an educator, researcher, and founder and convener of the Career Linguist Network and convener of the Linguistic Society of America's special interest groups on linguistics beyond academia. She's organized today's webinar, and she'll be introducing the panelists to us. And joining Dr. Trester as the panelists will be Samantha Beaver, the founder of Memra Language Services, Sam Cooper, curriculum specialist with No Red Inc., Christopher Stewart, analytical linguist at Google, Frankie Pennington, data collection administrator at Sensory Inc., and Brent Wu, language engineer at Amazon. There'll be a lot of time for question and answer, so have your questions ready, and I will get into that a little bit later. And I want to take just a couple of minutes now to make sure that you're familiar with the GoToWebinar dashboard. So first, you're going to see an audio widget on your dashboard that will allow you to hear the audio for this webinar using your computer's audio or by phone. And just so you know, your microphones are disabled for the first part of this webinar. And for the Q&A portion, you can actually tweet your questions using the hashtag LSATech, L-S-A-T-E-C-H. Second, there's a handouts widget you'll see on your dashboard, and that has copies of the panelists' presentations. You can download those at any time. We will also have those posted on the LSA website later on. And then finally, we wanted to take a quick survey just so that the panelists can get a better idea of who you are. So I'm going to open that in a minute, and you can just take a second to vote on it, and we'll have the whole thing ready in about a minute. So go ahead. Okay, it just asks your status. Okay, we'll just wait a couple more seconds. Most of you have voted now. Okay, I think that's about enough. 95% of you have voted. Great. I'm going to close the poll, and then I'm going to share the results with you so everybody can see. So hopefully you can see that now. 15% of you are undergraduate students, 53% are grad students, 13% are postdocs or contingent faculty members, 13% are tenured or tenure-track faculty members, and 7% are linguists in government or industry. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, and going to go ahead and turn the floor over to Anna Trester, and she will start the webinar for us.
Thanks, David. Thank you all for being here. I'm delighted to have such a great turnout. As David mentioned, I am the co-convener of this special interest group of the Linguistic Society of America. David, you'll call up our website. Here we go. So we call ourselves sometimes the LBASIG. We're the Linguistics Beyond Academia Special Interest Group. We are a space for broad career education, career exploration. It's a space to be asking questions about career, any kind of career, right? If you're thinking about a tenure line position at an R1 institution, that is a career. This is a space for talking about career, for asking questions, for plugging in with people who have experience and want to share experience and learning from one another. So we organize a number of events as part of this special interest group. You may have seen us at the annual meeting. There will be a bunch of events at the annual meeting coming up in January in New York. There will be an expo, well, we call it a mixer these days, where you can mix and mingle and talk to folks who have decided to come and talk about their work. There will be panels at the annual meeting. There will be mentoring, one-on-one coaching if you're looking to get, a consult on your resume or on a website or on professional storytelling. Lots of events at the annual meeting. We also organize events like these. This webinar was inspired, in fact, by a conversation I had with your first panelist. We'll go to Christopher Stewart in just a minute. But he and I had a conversation where he shared this concept of what he wished he would have known before he embarked on this career in tech. And I think this is a space for what you wish you would have known. So ask lots of questions. As David said, we have a hashtag LSA Tech. I'll be watching Twitter for questions. And I hope you feel very invited to bring your curiosity, to bring your creativity, to bring your, your rigorous research abilities to the task of researching your own career pathways. Okay, so just one quick thing that I wanted to mention, in addition to the events at the annual meeting and webinars like these, as part of the special interest group, we are starting to have, I'm very excited about this, local meetups. We just had one last week in Boulder, Colorado. If anyone wants to organize a meetup in their city, please be in touch. It's super easy. You just put out an announcement. The LSA helps circulate it. We had almost a dozen people last week in Boulder, and a great time was had by all. Stay tuned for an update about that. But I mean, this is all about building community and sharing ideas and sharing resources. So let's do it virtually like this. Let's do it face-to-face. Let's do it locally. Let's do it nationally. Okay, so without further ado, let's kick off with our first panelist. As I say, this started from a conversation about, what Chris wished he would have known. So thank you for starting us off, Chris.
Sure thing. Can you guys hear me? Just want to make sure. Okay, I take that as yes. Okay, if not, please let me know. So thank you very much, Anna, for that that introduction. So yeah, like Anna said, we started sort of talking about this as a way to figure out what I, in any case, would wish I had known before embarking on a career in linguistics in industry. I did and I'll talk about this in a minute, but I did a PhD like many of you have done or are doing, and then took a tenure track job and left that for a career in industry. So I hope to give you a little bit of a talk about what I've learned in that time. So just a little bit about me. Right now I work as an analytical linguist in the ads quality organization for Google in the Los Angeles office. Previously, I have worked in a lot of different kinds of industrial applications, both of linguistics and in other sorts of fields. So as I mentioned, I was a tenure track professor and assistant professor in modern languages as a French linguistics professor at the University of Texas at Arlington for 3 years. I left that. I worked in text-to-speech research and development at Nuance Communications in Belgium, then 2 jobs as a senior data scientist, and I'm now, like I said, working as an analytical linguist at Google. Before all that, I did education, as everyone should do, right? So undergrad in French and political science, and a PhD from the French department, what was then the French department at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. My research was mostly on the processing of speech with social meaning. You can see there my dissertation title and advisor. And technically what I learned, I guess the first 3 probably to some extent before I started in industry were some scripting. So I did my stats in R way back when there's no such thing as RStudio. Experimental design, which you're probably all very familiar with, statistical analysis. And like I said, I now have a bit of a background in data science, and I'd be happy to talk more about that during the questions, but I'm not going to talk about it now. Because I want to tell you what I think you should know if you're going to try and get a career in industry. So that's going to really be my focus here. So typically when I tell non-linguists that I work at Google, they say, does your team do natural language processing? They assume that is, especially computer scientists, they assume that's the only real reason to be in tech if you are a linguist. And I say no, and then they say, well, why, what are you doing? And what I kind of give them is this sort of thumbnail sketch of what we do. So my team at Google is called EWalk. It stands for Eternally Working on Quality, and it's in the ads organization at Google, which makes a lot of money, as you can probably imagine. And we are a human evaluation team. And so what does that mean? Well, if you think about it, for ads to work on Google, we require a lot of information that we don't necessarily have or we can't programmatically produce by ourselves. So for instance, if you search for Google, if you're on Google and you search for pizzeria in Santa Monica, and you get an ad that's for a pizzeria in New York, you're served an ad that's for a pizzeria in New York, is that a good ad or a bad ad? How good is that ad? How bad is that ad? That's something we get from people. So how do we do that? We get that by human labeled data. And this is a field called human computation or crowdsourcing. And so we get data rated by humans. How do we do that? Well, we ask people about these things. We ask raters. And this is how in this particular instance, linguistics translates into an industry career in that linguists are really good at asking people about data. This is what linguists are trained to do. And this is one of the reasons why Google hires linguists, in addition to computational linguists. Of course, there are plenty of computational linguists, but there are other kinds of linguists. And I'd be also happy to talk about that during questions too. So I said that I was going to tell you what you needed to know. So here are 2 musts and 1 nice to have if you want to work in tech, in my opinion. People feel free to ask questions or disagree or whatever. But the first and foremost, I would say, is you need an understanding of a high-level scripting language, so something like Python. This is a coding Swiss Army knife. It can do basically anything. The other thing, so anything from, when I say anything, I mean anything from like scrape a web page, so get all the stuff that's on a web page and put it somewhere, text processing, audio processing, statistical modeling, data manipulation, anything. So it's really the Swiss Army knife, and one thing you really need to have. The other is SQL, which stands for Structured Query Language, which is probably necessary to work almost anywhere that uses data, because data is stored in these giant databases, and you have to get some part of that data out and do something with it, right? This is, if you want to work anywhere that uses data, this is what you're going to need. And third, I would say, is a nice to have is R, which is a more specialized tool for statistical computing and graphics. And I'd be happy to talk about those afterwards too, as well. I'll end on this because I know we don't have a whole lot of time, and I want to give you guys time for questions. But I'm often asked, well, how can I get a job at Google? And here are just some tips that I like to give to people. So first, learn to teach yourself things. So figure out what you do best, what works for technical skills that you're interested in. Second, do side projects. So any chance that you can get to show potential employers that you know how to write code to solve problems is great. So you find problems and fix them. If you don't know where to start, Stack Overflow is a good place to start. You know, you get all kinds of noob questions about very basic things that you probably know how to do, answer them, and then you'll build up sort of a repertoire of instances that you can show employers where you have helped people with your knowledge. Find chances to use new tools, be sophisticated about data, apply for an internship, automate your own drudge work. Again, if you want to work in tech, start a GitHub repository, put all the code you ever write that you're willing to share with people into that repository, because that's how you get your job. So last thing, prove it. Keep records of what you've done. That's what I'm talking about. Make artifacts, understand impact, and be able to explain what you do to both engineers and non-engineers. And that's all I'm going to say right now. And I will be happy to take questions. And I thank you for having me. I will stop sharing my screen now so that whoever is going next can take it over.
Okay, Frankie?
Okay, yes. I have a terrible glare on my glasses, so I'm going to apologize for that now. And hopefully everybody can hear me. If not, please send something in the chat. So David is going to scroll through my very brief slides here. I just have a couple of points, and then I'll fill in the rest just in a little bit of conversation. So it's kind of funny to be involved in this because several months ago when I was just looking for a job in tech, I sent Chris Stewart a message on LinkedIn, kind of this panicked, like, I'm looking for a job in tech, I don't know what to do. And so it's kind of funny to be at this point now. And I will say I do feel a little bit out of my element because I have only been in my current position for going on about 4 months now. I still consider myself a recent grad, so just finished up in May, but here's my contact information. I am the data collection administrator at Sensory, and my email and LinkedIn. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn, contact me via email if you have questions or comments after this. So I'll give a little bit about my background and then talk about the things that I wish I would have known going into a job in tech. Okay, so right, like I said, still a recent grad, just finished up in North Carolina State's MA in Sociolinguistics program. Before that was undergraduate at the University of Texas at Arlington. My research background is in endangered languages. So as you can imagine, I'm in a very different place now, working in tech in industry. So as I mentioned before, I work in speech data collection for automatic speech recognition and voice activation for consumer electronics at Sensory, and I'm in Boulder, Colorado. So working in endangered language research, one of the things that was most meaningful to me and the most important thing for me there was field work and working with people and working closely with language. So luckily that's something I have been able to hold on to in my position at Sensory. collecting data, that's what I do, working directly with people. A lot of it also comes from crowdsourcing, but I do have the opportunity to go out and collect, data in the field, essentially. So I would say one thing I was concerned about going into an industry job, leaving academics as a student, was going to be able to do the things with language that are important to me and that I enjoy and that I find meaningful. And luckily the answer was yes. So just some more about my background. I do not have very much, basically no computer science experience at all. Some very basic, HTML and scripting. I have essentially 100% linguistics background. So I was a little bit intimidated having interest in working in tech, but not feeling like I didn't have the skills necessarily. I had one other job previously in tech, which provided me some exposure to the field and to industry jobs in tech, but yeah, very little computer science scripting experience, things like that. So one thing I'll say that I wish I would have known the importance of early on, going into grad school and in the job search process, was making the most out of your degree and tailoring it. So I think, for example, as an undergraduate, I felt like, okay, I'm going to do what I have to do to graduate and then I'll move on. Now, at that time, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do as far as a job, but I wish I would have made the most out of it. And so going into grad school, I kind of realized, okay, I have to, in 2 years, decide what I'm going to do as far as a career. So I need to make the most out of this experience. And so what that looked like for me was taking classes in other departments, or like Chris was talking about, learning how to do things on your own, doing independent studies, seeking out research assistantships, things that will help you gain the skills that are important to employers in tech. And something else I wish I would have done earlier than I started was just reading job descriptions. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you plan on applying to, but just getting a sense of what employers are looking for. And that goes for any job, but just getting a sense for what kinds of skills are important to employers. And I will also echo Chris and agree with him that some kind of skills in scripting are extremely important, and most job postings that I looked at, not even just the ones that I applied to, required those kinds of skills. So as I said, not having any computer science experience, I had to make time and kind of expose myself to those types of skills on my own. So that's a little bit about my background and what I've been doing. And one other thing I kind of want to bring up, and this is not necessarily just about jobs in tech, but just industry jobs in general, what the transition from academia to industry is like. And I'm interested to hear what the other panelists have to say about their experience with this, and if you all have any questions about this. But I think maybe I'm not the only one who has felt like this, some kind of guilt maybe about leaving academia, whether that be as a student or someone who has been involved in academic research for a long period of time, and also feeling like once I leave academia and I'm in industry, is what I'm going to be doing still going to be important? Is it going to be impactful? Is it going to be meaningful? So that's just kind of a side comment that I have there, something that I'm interested in hearing more about everyone else's experience with. So I will end here, and looking forward to hearing your questions after.
Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Samantha Beaver. Can you hear me? And can you see me? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen and make it big quick. All right. So I have a little bit of a different background, than some of the other linguists on the panel. I am a linguist in terms of my education. I have a master's in applied English linguistics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. That's where I am right now. But I'm actually not technically working in tech. I have started my own business called Memra Language Services, and we can go into a little bit about that in just a minute. But you can sort of see some of my contact information and also the URL to my website for anybody who's looking for that information. So there are lots of factors that sort of led me into entrepreneurship as a linguist, and I won't go into all of them right now, but one of the main reasons was that when you're studying linguistics, you see how broad and important all of the applications of linguistic research are, or is. So, and you also realize that these that this research is often not very well disseminated. I mean, every once in a while, linguistic research will make its way into like ESL or foreign language teaching, but besides that, a lot of the really meaningful results don't sort of get out there just to normal people who might be able to benefit from them. So that was sort of one of my motivations. I'm like, I want to be a linguist that connects linguistics to the people that are actually using language all the time, right? Which are just normal people doing their everyday jobs. So how do you do that, right? So part of the problem is that people don't know what linguistics is, and then of course they also don't know why they would ever need it, right? They don't know that they have a need for language analysis. And so my approach has been, and this is the reason why I'm included in this webinar, is that to reframe language as something that we think about as a technology that we use every day to accomplish our daily tasks. And like, for example, I like to use the example of getting someone else to close the window. Like, let's say you're at your friend's house and you're sitting on their couch and it's cold in there, and you want your friend to close the window. So like, how do you accomplish that task, right? Of course, you use language. And that's sort of the technology you use to get that thing done, right? And at work, regardless of your field, right? Even if you're a web developer or whatever else, you're still using language to achieve your workplace tasks. And once people sort of agree to try out this framework and think about language as a technology that they're using at work, all of a sudden the discussion for like, okay, let's actually think about our language use. That discussion sort of opens up and people are willing to consider linguistics as something that might be important. And so in order to sort of really drive that point home, I like to use this statistic that says 96% of executives cite ineffective communication as the main reason for workplace failures. A lot of people in the business world, when they first see something like this, they often sort of like to brush it off, because ineffective communication, those two words put together, to them feels like an inevitability. Like, there will always be miscommunications and there's not really a lot we can do to change that. And while they're right that there will always be miscommunications, if we take our framework for thinking about language as a technology, we can sort of rewrite this statistic and re-understand it. Oops, let's skip this one. To be something like this, right? So ineffective communication really becomes something more like a technological failure. And then this statistic is another one that uses, instead of ineffective communication, lack of open communication. And under a technological framework, that becomes sort of like a refusal to use the company technology or the technological processes that are in place. And once we sort of rewrite that statistic, it looks like this. So 96% of executives cite technological failures as being the reason for workplace failures. And then all of a sudden that's like embarrassing, right? Because when you think of a technological failure, you think of something like your printers are constantly broken, or you can't get the internet to stay connected, or something very like simple and basic that should be addressed, right? And when you have technological failures at work, they are addressed right away. And so in that sense, those language challenges, should be addressed quickly as well. So all this to say, when we reframe language as technology that we're using at work, we become motivated to make sure that it's running smoothly so that we can achieve our workplace goals. And that sort of has been my angle in trying to bring linguistics to the business world, because as linguists, we all know that it's important, right? But how do you get somebody else to understand that it's something that's inherently valuable? And I think Frankie sort of alluded to that too. That's one of the fears that you have in leaving academia, is that as a linguist, you've seen all of the amazing things that linguistics does, and you don't want to lose that. You want to hold on to that. And so the challenge is, how do you hold on to that? And my approach was just to try something new in an entrepreneurial experiment. So this is just one way to keep that meaning moving into, an industry, basically. And so, yeah, you can sort of see my little pitch line at the bottom that it adds, linguistics essentially adds the missing piece and helps you take advantage of the technology you've always had at your disposal, but you've never learned to use, right? And if you think about it, that's really the truth, right? So many, we all can talk, so we all have this wonderful technology that lets us build relationships and accomplish tasks, and so many people never learn to use it. And when I say that, all I mean is apply some of the amazing linguistic research that linguists in academia have done, that when distilled in the right way could really benefit your average Joe working for an insurance company. So that's what I'm doing now, and I'm excited for questions as they come up.
Okay, Sam Beaver is next.
Sam Cooper.
Oh, sorry, Sam Cooper.
Hi.
Too many Sams.
Okay, hello, can everybody hear me? I guess so. Okay, so I only have one slide. It just has a bit about my background information, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I ended up in tech, because I kind of took a roundabout route to get here. So my educational background is that I read German and linguistics at Pembroke College, Oxford. I chose psycholinguistics as a specialist subject, but also did a lot with linguistics of German. And since I was very focused on becoming fluent in German, I spent all of my summers in Germany at this summer job that I really loved, teaching English as a foreign language at a summer school. And I decided to keep doing that. So after university, I went and taught in Spain for 5 years, and obviously was using my linguistics training a lot during that time in a very practical, hands-on kind of way, explaining grammar to people who needed to learn it. But then changes in my personal life brought me to San Francisco, and I decided not to go straight back into teaching, because it would have likely required going back to university and getting certified, and it just didn't feel like the right time. So I had to figure out what I was going to do. And I felt strongly about staying connected to education somehow, but wasn't sure how I could make that happen. And then I met Anna Marie Trester, and I took part in the Career Linguist Campfire, which is how I ended up learning more about the field of education technology, and finding out that curriculum designer was a job that existed, and it seemed like a job that I could do. And I now work for an edtech company called Noved Inc. I've been in my position for about 6 months now. And we're an online grammar and writing product for K-12 students, geared mainly towards middle and high school students. So I spend a lot of time designing curriculum. I write a lot of lessons and tutorials, that kind of thing, but also researching the education system and classroom best practices. And something that I would not have expected to learn 1 year ago when I moved to the States is that there are tons of linguists working in EdTech. Right now, about half of the members of the curriculum team at Reading are linguists, and I know that that's also the case at some other EdTech companies, particularly the ones that have language arts curriculum. Because obviously language arts curriculum designers need to be really good with language and able to write well. But there's also a certain level of technical skill involved, and I don't mean programming, I'm really not a programmer. But there's a lot of problem solving abilities involved in figuring out how you can make this content and how you can teach things through an online platform. It's very, very different from doing it live in a classroom environment. So EdTech hiring managers, it turns out, are very interested in linguists because they kind of sit at that intersection between having really good communication skills and language ability, but also more analytical problem-solving abilities. And yeah, I said I'm not a programmer, so I'm computer literate, and I have a working knowledge of HTML, and that's about it. So something I wish I'd known when I was getting into tech is that there are a lot of non-technical roles in the sector, and that they need people to fill those non-technical roles. And the engineers at my company, and I'm sure at other companies, work very hard to create interfaces that are user-friendly for non-programmers. So they make it easy for me to do my job without actually having to know how to code properly, which I appreciate. And I think that actually covers everything. I'm excited to hear questions. I've also got my contact information on that slide if you would like to connect with me later. But I'm going to hand over now to, I think it's Brent.
Hello? All right, looks like the microphone's working. Yeah, I'm Brent. My name is Brent Wu, and I'm a language engineer at Amazon in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I'm at right now. Just the standard disclaimer before I say anything. Anything I say has to be my own. It's only reflecting my own experience, and it's not representing the company at, in any official capacity. So a little bit about myself. I'm a recent graduate student, and I did my linguistics PhD work at UW in Seattle, University of Washington in Seattle. I have pretty limited work experience. It's mostly tied to my teaching and research assistantship that I had at UW. I was also a intern at the LSA office when they were in DC. And I've done like freelance, hotel playing the piano, which actually I talked about during the interview. And so, you really can't discredit experiences like that. I bill myself research-wise as a syntactician, pretty theoretical, so theoretical syntax, really specifically on coordination. And the most common question that I get about my job now is, do you need programming? So based on my own experience, no, I do not bill myself as a programmer or someone who knows much about computer science, but you would have to be comfortable learning. You would have to be comfortable learning about these technologies. And so in research, I had some computational experimental kind of projects or components to my overall research program, which was couched in syntactic theory, but it never was like the primary focus of my research. But I did know that I was comfortable learning new things, and I think that translated into a successful application here. What is a language engineer, at least at Amazon? Well, my specific team works on Alexa. So we work on the syntactic side of Alexa. We design language schemas. We design how this whole system should work language-wise. We write grammars and FSTs, so finite state transducers. Very syntactic work. The daily work is very exciting, it's very challenging, it's very interesting. All my coworkers have a very interesting background. They come from, they're either coming from or going to even academia, or they came from a previous industry job. There's all sorts of people that come in to be language engineers and or work on my team on kind of the language components of Alexa. Day to day, there's plenty of discussion and creativity. So another thing I get asked is kind of, coming out of the intellectually stimulating environment of academia, are you afraid that, industry work is going to be boring or anything? Far from it. Every day there's something new going on. There's definitely debates and discussions and very interesting meetings to argue about things, which is always a lot of fun. And we like doing that in academia. And so there's definitely that stimulation there in my work. And finally, it's just very gratifying to see my linguistic contributions coming out in a real consumer product. So when I push a change, when I improve a model or do something to, address a certain question or a certain type of action or something like that, it will eventually be pushed to a real product. And something like that is, the feeling of seeing your real linguistic work coming out in a product that people can buy. That's a great feeling. That's all I have to say. Looking forward to any more questions you might have.
Okay. So I guess we'll all come on to video now, if we could have all the panelists up here. So I have a couple questions, and then we'll open it up to everybody's questions. But thank you all. That was wonderful. And many of you hit on this theme of what you wish you would have known. So I'm tempted to start with the other question I warned you about, which was, what did you think you knew? Yeah, the grammar of that's slightly awkward. What did you think you knew when you started on this path that maybe was wrong, or you were happily surprised about? Happy surprises.
I will say that one thing, I really thought that I knew what it meant to be a linguist, like actually be one. When someone asks you like, oh, like, who are you? What do? You say, I'm a linguist, right? And I thought, especially as an undergrad, that this had a very narrow definition, which is just, a PhD, academic research, R1 university or something to that effect. And I think I've been pleasantly surprised that, as you just gain more experience, and also as the path that your life takes, that being a linguist is much broader than that. And you don't have to follow that path in order to really be a linguist. So that's one thing that should be encouraging to all the students out there, I think. So.
Awesome. Anyone else? I'm tempted to just point out we have a lot of geographical diversity and, tenure and job diversity too. So as people ask questions, I hope people recognize that they, can ask just starting out questions and having been in the field for a number of years kinds of questions too. But Brent, did I see you raise your hand?
Yeah. I could speak to what you thought you knew. It's kind of a moment of humility, if it were. So I thought I knew how to communicate my research. So one of my personal missions is kind of public scholarship and things like that. But you ever have to explain your linguistic results to a programmer? Try it. Some love programmers. You guys are great. But that's a big part of it is communicating your contributions. Because you're hired as the specialist in language, and you are the one that knows that stuff, and you have to be able to communicate that stuff out to other people who don't. That's the nature of it. And so I think coming from academia or conferences, it's very common for us to go very quickly over, this is kind of section 1 or section 0 stuff. Oh, this paper assumes, Chomsky 2000 minimalist theory, and you're supposed to know what that is. Start a paper, try to start a syntax paper without even assuming that, and go even one step beyond that in explanation. So I thought I knew how to communicate, but I think being in an industry job and having to communicate to even different types of people that I hadn't been exposed to before within academia, that's something that I learned really quickly. You had to adapt to.
I love how you, did I just imagine that you get air quotes with industry? I would love to put that as a question too. That's a word that I would love to hear people's thoughts about. What does that word mean? Just tossing out some keywords. Christopher mentioned another one, which is natural language processing, which is bandied around quite a bit here in Silicon Valley. I think that can mean a lot of things too.
I wanted to add too on the subject of the last discussion that one thing that I don't think that I realized is that we had this assumption that as an academic job, you get a tenure track job, you're happy with it, you live there until you die, and that's the end of the story, right? And I think that that is not only not true within academia, although changing jobs in academia is much more challenging than it is changing in tech. The other thing is if you get a job in tech, so let's say you come out of your PhD and you get a job in tech, if you don't like it, you leave. There is no I'm betraying my fundamental values. No, someone offers you more money or a better situation or a place where you want to be, you take the job. So I guess what I would say that I didn't know is that things don't have to be as long-term as you think. If you get a job and you don't like it, you take another job. And sometimes it's hard to find that job. I'm not telling you that that's always easy, but yeah, that's one thing I would say.
How have you experienced that, Christopher? I think a lot of people notice that the volatility, if you want to call it that, or I mean, how do you experience that? It's become very normal, I think.
Yeah, I think after a while it sort of becomes normal where so when I got my first job outside of academia, I had a choice between a postdoc and the job that I eventually took, and it was a big sort of, what do I do? And after that, you get one job and you get it, and perhaps it's in an R&D department, but it's very developmental and very little research. Maybe you don't like that, so you want to do something slightly different. And then, the way that I got into the data science thing was I'd never heard of the word. This is 2013 or 14, and I spent the summer in San Francisco working on one of the voices for Siri, and a friend of mine said, "Oh yeah, my husband works as a data scientist," and I said, "Wow, that sounds pretty cool. I like data and I like science. What's that about?" And then, so I guess then I looked into that, did some online programs. Next thing I know, I had to struggle, but I got a job as a data scientist. And I didn't like that job, so I took another job. Then I didn't like that job, so I took another job. That's where I am now. So, how do you experience it? I mean, for me, it's just I think it's the kind of thing where once you take a job, if you really don't like it enough to look for another one, you'll know because you're already looking for another job. So I don't know any more to say than that. That's how I experience it.
Yeah, that's great. Anyone else want to talk to, the changing nature of, the new normal, I guess, the degree to which we change jobs?
I mean, there's definitely a personality piece to it too. I mean, I see that in entrepreneurship. You go to an entrepreneur's meetup, and I mean, everybody's got the same vibe going on, right? Because it takes a certain type of person to be willing to do that. Not only is it like high risk, but it's also, yeah, most of them fail, right? So it's high risk personally, but also it's very likely that your business won't actually work out the way you think it will. And then in tech, there's a lot of turnover too, like people changing jobs a lot. And I think that has a similar feeling, right? Of like, well, maybe this employee is going to be here today and maybe not tomorrow. And I don't know, we'll just have to go find another one. But that's not always for everybody. So it's important when you're going into that, you know, you might think you know who you are or what kind of job you are, but a lot of times it's important just to think like, do I have the right personality for this environment, right? Not even just the specific tasks you're doing, but like, am I willing to like go move here or look for the next job or, you know, be willing to have everything sort of taken away fast. So I guess that's something to consider.
Yeah, I think that's great. I wanted to share with you, Samantha, one of the questions in the chat stream.
Oh boy.
Comment really that in British English, a way that you could ask someone to close a window is to say, "That's a nice jumper you're wearing." That was funny.
Yeah, I love that. Whenever I ask that question, I get people just like giving me crazy answers across the board, like, "Oh, it's a little cold in here," or "I'm chilly. Do you think we should turn the heat on?" Right? All these super indirect ways of giving someone a directive that you just don't realize you're doing until a linguist tells you. Do you realize that there's so many different ways to tell someone to go close the window, right?
That we might just toss that out there. So one question that came up, something that percolated up in the excellent introductions you all did, was the idea of reading a job ad. And I thought that might be something that people might have thoughts about, advice for people. Especially those of you, maybe Frankie, who were just recently doing this, Sam. Any, you know, from your recent experience of reading job ads, or even, you know, Samantha, to talk about, you know, in an entrepreneurial venture, you're not necessarily going to be responding to a job ad, but that doesn't mean that sort of the idea or the approach might not resonate in some ways. Any thoughts, Sam or Frank?
I have a couple of thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, one thing I should say about job ads is that they initially made me think that I would never get a job in tech, and I don't have an advanced degree. And a lot of them say MA preferred, PhD if possible. Turned out not to be necessary. And there are a lot of people at my company who have MAs and PhDs, but a lot of us don't. So that's one thing to know. And in that spirit, I would add that a lot of tech job ads list nice to haves as though they were musts. And it's not always quite as strict as you must know these things and you must have X years of experience doing Y. It's a bit more flexible than that. I think they're really just looking for people who can do the job. So if you're reading an ad and you think, yeah, I think I could do this, I don't have all this stuff, but I think I could do this job, there's really no harm in applying. It's not quite as rigid as it seems when you're first getting started reading them.
I like it.
I think something else along those lines was that I initially was pretty overwhelmed too, and looking at all these postings and, you know, seeing all these skills and things that I didn't have. And I think one thing to keep in mind that's important is just your willingness to learn these things as you start a job. So just having an idea of the things that your potential employer might find important or be looking for. I think at least if you kind of have in the back of your mind, maybe I'll learn this at some point, that's kind of helpful to know as well.
Well, speaking of learning things, I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Do you mind if I just say something really quick?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I just want to add that you might, coming out of academia, you might think, I'm not qualified for anything. That is not true. People will hire you to do all sorts of things. You might have a PhD and they'll hire you to sweep the floors. But it's on you. It's on you, the job seeker, to figure out, oh, this is going to be an extremely boring job and I'm going to be really unhappy in 3 months. So I would say when you're looking at job ads, it's caveat emptor. Like, make sure you know what you're getting into, because people will pay you to do something that you don't want to do. And you have to figure out, do I want to do this?
I love that.
I learned that the hard way.
Oh, I gather there's some stories there. This question, I think, is for you, Christopher. Did you specifically learn Python and SQL before applying with Google? Yeah, that's for you. If so, how did you go about that? Certificate course, part of your graduate program?
I did some Python work in Python, but mostly in R as a grad student. I did not learn it at Google. I don't really know where I learned it. It just sort of happened. Like I said, I think nowadays anyone who wants to work with data, you will need to know some SQL. That's how you get, like, let's say you work for a company that sells Cokes to people in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they want to know what were our sales numbers in this county in this month. Well, how are you going to find that information? It's probably in a database somewhere, and you're going to need to query the database. So I guess I don't really know how I learned it, to be honest. It just, at some point, someone said, you need to find that, you need to get that from this database. And that's how I learned it. And as for learning Python, there are lots of good ways to learn Python. Probably there's a book called, I think it's Learn Python the Hard Way or something to that effect, but it's the most common Learn Python book. That's a great place to start. And then just do something that you like to do with Python. So like, one tip that I always give people is if a company asks you to do a coding challenge or a tech challenge, say, I'm happy to do it. They want you to code up something like that will recognize speakers or something like that. Say, I'm happy to do it, but I'm going to put it on my GitHub repository. I own it, and I will show it to people later on as proof that I know, how to do X, whatever the coding challenge involves. And one time I had a startup ask me to do a speaker diarization thing where it's like the cocktail party problem, where you separate out different voices in a speech signal where multiple people are speaking, and then identify them. And I use Python to do it. So find something that you like to do and use Python to do it.
I can add to what Christopher just said about learning. I really like how he said, I really like how you said, I don't remember when I learned it, because that just reminded me of, there's a great Eddie Izzard bit where he talks about language learning. And he says that when I learned French, there's a chapter in the textbook that says, in this chapter, you will learn the subjunctive. Izzard says, no, you won't learn the subjunctive. You will touch it. You will touch it and then run away from it for a very long time. And I think that's how we approach learning languages and how we should talk about, even with something like Python or SQL, right? You don't really learn it, and then that's a package has discrete boundaries, and then you go into an interview with that. You kind of, as an interviewer will give you a question, you will say, oh, I kind of can think through this. This looks familiar with something that I read before, or like a tutorial that I ran through. And let me talk with you about how I would solve this based on my fuzzy kind of acquaintance with it, because you just touched it. And I think if we frame it that way, that'll kind of get rid of this idea that, you have to go into a job and learn this box, which is called Python, and it has this discrete boundary. There are definitely basic skills, like there are curricula that you should know, how to alias, how to make linked lists or something like that. There's definitely lists like that you can go through. But I would just say, as advice, just get acquainted with these things.
So Brent, while we're listening to you, I had a question in the box for you, and I'm going to throw this out to everybody, actually, but maybe starting with you. Folks wanted to know a little bit more about your job interview at Amazon.
What did they want to know? Can
you tell us a little bit more about your job interview at Amazon?
I cannot. I don't know if anyone else, maybe I could follow how anyone else might want to talk about their interview, but that's something that I don't know if I can talk too many specifics about. I can say in very general terms that I felt good going through my described research program and having the experience that I did, which which is just very theoretical syntax with a sprinkle of experimental, meaning like mechanical Turk and ANOVA in stats, like that's it, and stuff like that. I felt good going into the interview because I knew that I knew my domain, which is language, and that's 50% of the job title, and so I could talk about that. And so as long as I had stories and kind of new interesting language problems to talk about, the rest of it went pretty well. Yeah.
Anyone else want to talk about a job interview? Tips? Surprises?
I could talk a little bit more about technical interviews if you like.
Yeah, and Sam, I know that you had to do sample projects too. I'm gonna put you on the spot, so maybe talk a little bit about that. Maybe that's the same thing. Go ahead, Christopher.
Okay, yeah, sorry. So what I wanted to say about technical interviews is this. So sometimes you'll be given the dreaded coding interview, and in which someone will ask you to write code on the spot. Do not despair at the coding interview. Do not despair. Do not despair. There's a book called Cracking the Coding Interview, which you do not need to read because it's like 1,500 pages long and involves all sorts of stuff that no one will ever ask you to do. Why? Because you're not an engineer. You're a linguist. It's important to keep that in mind. But what I wanted to say about the coding interview in particular is it's just treat it like the scientific method. Like, if you don't understand the entire question, let's say someone gives you, like, they say, traverse this entire list of characters and find words in this or something like that. Let's say I'm just going to take the first 10 characters and try and find a word in the first 10 characters. If you can't do that, if you don't really know how to do that, well, the first character, and then what do? Well, you add a character. What does that involve? A loop, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what I would say is it's just like, if your printer won't print, what do? Well, you try and check one thing at a time until you get to what the crux of the matter is. So the worst thing you can do in a coding interview is just freak out and like sob uncontrollably. Just try and stay cool and figure out like the smallest, most like circumscribed portion of it that you can figure out and write pseudocode for. You don't necessarily have to know all the Python decorators and I forgot this one. Like, no one cares. Just write it in pseudocode. It's not a big deal. And that might not be for every company, but I'd say for the large majority of coding interviews, you're fine with pseudocode.
Awesome. Sam, anything to add?
Okay, so I didn't do a technical interview. There certainly wasn't any coding. What I will say is that coming out of an education background, the interview process was surprisingly long. My previous job application experiences have been, I send a school a CV, they interview me, I get a job. And my interview process for the job I have now, I think, took a little over a month. There were a lot of stages, some of which were, I don't want to go into too much detail, but some of which were kind of to do with the work and seeing how I would handle the work, and some of which were just more to do with, am I a cultural fit? Tech companies, I think, care about cultural fit in a way that the schools I have worked at didn't. So just be prepared for there to be many stages. And I kept thinking, this is the last one. They've interviewed me in person. It's the last stage.
Nope.
Nope. But it was a very interesting process, and it was kind of good because it kind of let me learn more about the company, and I didn't know anything about tech, so it was kind of good to go through. Okay, yeah, I actually can see myself fitting into this work, and like having a bit more context before ultimately taking the job was helpful. So take it as a research opportunity. You're checking them out as much as they're checking you out, and you have plenty of time to do it.
I love it. All right, so just to say, we've sort of segued into the Q&A section. So keep your cues coming. I have questions coming in on the chat and coming in on Twitter, but keep them coming. One thing that I wanted to put to the group are, we're getting questions about keywords to be searching for, where people search for jobs. Someone asked, what were the concrete steps that you took to get a job? So anything, concrete bits of advice that folks have, really details to share about the job searching.
I would say first thing is if you're not already signed up for Linguist List job alert emails, I think I stalked those for 6 months. So that's a good place to start for sure.
It's interesting that you bring up keywords because I was just I just had a meeting with a marketing company here in Madison, and they asked me, they were like, so how have you like organized your SEO for your like linguistic services, because nobody's searching for that. That sort of made me think of, that keyword question, because yeah, a lot of jobs that may really relate to linguistics won't have linguistics in the title, and they might not even have language in the title. And so you should follow Career Linguist on LinkedIn, Anna Trester, because she often shares jobs that don't always say, this is for a linguist, right? But that doesn't mean that as a linguist, you're not really the best fit for the job. People don't know that they need linguists, but a lot of people do.
That's very, very true.
I wanted to add, use LinkedIn. Use LinkedIn. Yeah. And if you are interested in a job, see if you can find someone who works at that company on LinkedIn to tell you more about the job, possibly refer you for the job. That's how I got my first data science job. I had a friend who was working at the company, and I said, hey, I'm really interested in this. If you guys ever need anyone, and a lot of interviews later, I got the job. So yeah, use LinkedIn as your friend.
I love it.
If you can, stump up for the premium membership, because then you can see who looked at your profile, and it becomes this like dog park, sort of a thing going on. They're sniffing you out, you're sniffing them out.
And there is, in the archives of the LSA webinar series, we did a webinar on using LinkedIn as a linguist. Just a little plug for that one. That was fun times had by all.
What does dog park mean?
Oh, it's when dogs become acquainted with each other by switching back and forth between who's sniffing whom. So then the recruiter looks at your your profile, you look at their profile, you glance at each other longingly from across the room. That kind of thing.
Is that a term that people use?
I don't know. I just said it. I
love it. So I have a question in the chat box, and maybe you all are speaking to students specifically. I don't necessarily feel that you are, but in case there is advice anyone would give to someone who's not a student or currently working in an academic position, is there any different advice you might give to someone in that position that's different from if you've been giving advice kind of mainly to students, or thinking in terms of students, what students should know or wish you might have known?
One thing that I would say is that, the whole big thing now is like everything needs to be interdisciplinary, right? So like if you're in academia, it's like interdisciplinary, and that makes you super cool, and that's where you get all the money and whatever. So that's good, but I would say there's so much potential for being like even broader than interdisciplinary, like inter-institution, that you don't, like you can be doing like academic research in partnership with a company that has a lot of unstructured data, which is what linguists are good at, right? And they need somebody to say like, okay, we want to gain insights from this language data. Like we have a platform, all of our employees are on the platform. We need someone to help us analyze their data, and we want to operationalize it eventually. But before we do that, we need to figure out what's actually important here with the language. This is just a like example I'm just totally throwing out there, right? But the idea is that, yeah, like interdisciplinary doesn't have to be just within your own institution, like, you know, the sociology department and a linguistics department. I think there's a lot of opportunities for even more connections, even for your own work, right, and publication opportunities. And what the entrepreneurs, at least in the community here in Madison, are just like really wanting to have that university connection and talk to experts, because they're coming up with these pioneering tools, but they're not always content experts. And there's a lot of potential for that, but it's not always easy to make those connections, unfortunately. And so it could be easier, and it should be, and I think that would just blow open the whole field. So I would say that that's something to consider.
Love that. So just a flag, I've had a few questions now about salary, so I want you all thinking about how and if you're willing to talk about salary. Nobody has to reveal anything they don't want to reveal, but I'll leave you to percolate for that. For a second, I have a question specifically for Frankie and Sam. I'm interested in both speech recognition and English instruction / second language education. What are some of the intersections of that?
Can you repeat that, please?
For Frankie and Sam, I'm interested in both speech recognition and English instruction / second language education. What are some of the intersections of that? And could be anybody, if people hear intersections.
I mean, I can see ways in which speech recognition would be helpful for second language instruction on a that was teaching speaking and listening, which is not what my platform does. So I can't answer that more specifically, unfortunately.
I
Well,
can say something.
Sure.
About that, having worked in TTS, which is the exact opposite of ASR. So in TTS, you're going from from text to speech, and in ASR, you're going from speech to text. And those two worlds, they're pretty far apart. Second language acquisition or teacher, language instruction in any case, and ASR. ASR is really an industry that tends to be dominated by engineers, because you don't a speech recognition engine doesn't care what a p is compared to a t. It learns that data. It learns that distinction from the data. So you don't necessarily need a linguist to tell you that there are X number of interdental fricatives in Y language and all that kind of a thing. You can learn that from the speech signal. So I'm sure there are intersections there, but in my experience anyway, they're not readily apparent. They're very different fields. But perhaps someone has other experience.
I have a question for you, Chris. Do you feel more limited in scalability by relying on human subjects compared to colleagues using larger data sets?
Well, Google has a lot of money to collect a lot of data. We have 5,000 raters across the world, and I don't remember how many countries, 50-something countries, that rate 24 hours a day. There's 1 hour out of the year when people don't rate, and it's when the clocks change, because that's a phantom hour, right? It doesn't actually exist. So I don't feel that that's an issue, because we have a crap ton of data, more than we can do, more than sometimes it's easy to handle. So not really. I don't really. I worked at a company that did consulting for Walmart, and they had enormous quantities of data. It's more or less the same thing, in my opinion.
So I have a question. How how do I identify those who need my services but don't know it? I think that's a question for anybody. It sounds interesting, but how feasible is it? Ooh, I kind of want to jump in there. I think feasible is an interesting choice there. I think it's essential. I bet this is true for everybody, not just Samantha. I mean, you all have spoken to the need. Brent, you started here. You know, I've heard the term socializing your findings, socializing your work. I think everybody has to spend probably a percentage of their day, tell me if I'm wrong, explaining what you could be doing but aren't yet, or what you are doing and is not widely understood by your colleagues. Lots of nods. Maybe that question was for me. I think it's essential. I think most people don't know what we do, and even when you're doing it, might not know what it is that your skills and expertise is leading you to see. I talk to a lot of people who are, in jobs and saying, I'm not using my skills to the extent that I could be. So I think advocating for yourself is something that, not just your linguistic skills. I think, Chris, this speaks to that theme that we talked about volatility, but I think there's a dynamism, maybe is a better word, I think, in a job. And maybe this is something that's a misunderstanding that we bring with us from academia, the degree to which you can shape your job and constantly be redefining the terms of your responsibilities and looking for new. I saw it in the slide that you gave, Chris, about how to be looking for side projects that you could be doing. I think this is something that's true no matter where you are in your career while you have a job.
Yeah, I conceive of this as a research sabbatical in life. Mm-hmm. So it is what you make it. Like if you really want to work on linguistic problems and you don't care if there's a lot of drudgery involved, you can do that. If you want to really read up on machine learning and statistics and be proficient in Hive and Hadoop and all sorts of stuff like that, you can do that. It's all up to you. It's dependent on you what you want to do.
Yeah.
I have maybe some practical places where you could look. So obviously I provide linguistic services to businesses, just very average, normal businesses, right, that make the world go round. No, not really even high-tech businesses. Occasionally some entrepreneurs are interested in language services, but I would say one place where there's a lot of interest in linguistics is in workplace culture. So that's a big, word right now, especially that people want to figure out, how can we foster better workplace culture? And this is a very broad term for anything from diversity and inclusion all the way to I don't know, team building or just having some places, having beer on Fridays or doing volunteer events together. But so anytime anything with culture as a linguist, that should sort of trigger you to perk up your ears and say oh, maybe there's an opportunity for me here, because language indexes culture, right? So a lot of times what I find are that human resources departments are we want a way to assess where our workplace culture is at. And there's a lot of different people trying to figure out a lot of different tools to figure out how you can measure that, right? Because culture feels like this nebulous thing. And it is, it's complex and nebulous. How do you measure it? Language is one thing that is something you can look at and read and analyze that gives you a window into culture. And a lot of times it's so taken for granted that people don't even think to manipulate it, unlike, for example, what you wear, right? So I think where like my business has generated a lot of interest is in sort of workplace culture like areas. So that maybe is one place to look if you're like, I want to know who needs linguists. Most cities, I would say, probably have at least a few different things going on, people doing something like that already, that might want to partner with you. So, I mean, that's just one place to look. You can Google that right now if you want.
That's awesome. So I have so many questions, and I hope those of you, we have about 5-6 minutes left, so we're not going to get to all these questions. I hope that you all will ask, follow up. Many of our panelists gave ways to reach them. And I'm about to go put a question to all the panelists to let you kind of have your last thoughts and your last bits of advice. So do maybe signal how people can get in touch with you if you have not signaled that already. But I want to acknowledge there is a group of Google associate linguists who have been asking a few questions. So I wanted to just put one of their questions forward, which is, does anyone have advice about taking contract positions? There are more contract positions than full-time ones. How long should it take to get a full-time job? Are there things to avoid, ways to get ahead? And I also want to note one of the comments in the question thread was someone just urging apply. It may be that you may have an idea that you apply for a job and then you get your job and then you're fine, but probably most of you have had the experience of needing to apply. You need to apply for a lot of jobs sometimes. Sometimes you're very lucky and you get a job straight out of the box, but I think it's more the norm that people apply for dozens and sometimes multiple dozens of jobs. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not necessarily a reflection on your skills. Needing to apply is probably the way to think about it. But anyone have any thoughts about contract positions?
I would say I don't think it's particularly bad to take contract positions. I don't think anyone will look down on you for that. If that's the insinuation.
It seems like that's where a lot of people start. Wouldn't you say that that's starting to be kind of the norm of hiring? People get hired for contract positions, and
yeah, that certainly happens at Google. I will definitely say that happens very often at Google. And I just to follow up on this point of you will have to apply for tons and tons and tons of jobs. Yeah. No one's going to come to you and say, hey, you did a PhD on this amazing subject. I'd like to give you this great paying job that will entertain you for the rest of your life. That is not the real world.
Yeah. Well, so that's starting to, I think, point to where I want to end this, which is just looking to the future, looking forward. What do you all see sitting where you sit about the ways that your industry is changing, opportunities that are developing? Samantha, you were starting to point to some of these big trends, but just some last thoughts from each of you. And it could be, if you want to reveal salary, go for it. What are some last words? Chris, I'll pick on you because you were kind of starting to go there. Apply for lots of jobs.
Yes.
Don't think that that's a reflection on you.
No.
The way that it is.
Right, that's the way that it is. I want to echo what people are saying about having to go through lots of interviews for a single job. I've done tons of interviews for jobs that at the end I didn't even get the job. One company that I won't name, I went to their office, did a day's worth of interviews. This is after 7 or 8 phone interviews. A day's worth of interviews, an hour-long job talk on my research, and then a few follow-up phone interviews. In the end, I did it, and they said, well, we decided to go with someone else. So prepare yourself. It is a long slog. In terms of I don't have any great amazing advice other than I think persistence is like, there's no replacement for persistence. I interviewed for the job that I have now. I interviewed for it once, like 3 years before I got it. I interviewed for it again and got the job. So, I mean, don't think I didn't get this job, the world is over. They might ask you to apply for it again down the road. You never know. So I think there's no replacement for persistence. And then just in the vein of my last little thing I want to say is I have a website that I put on the slides, christophermstewart.com, and you can reach out. I put my Google email address there. I try and reply whenever people ask questions, as Frankie will tell you, and I'm happy to do whatever I can to help. So I'll sign up there.
Thanks. Frankie, how about you? Let's go in the order that you started.
Just to comment on what you asked about the future of this industry and prospects, job prospects. I guess the only thing I can really say is that tech is always emerging. There's always new stuff. There will always be jobs, and people who are looking for the skills that people like us have. So don't get bogged down in the job search. I mean, and I started to get that way. I think before I was offered my job, I applied to at least 50 jobs and was starting to feel like, I'll never find anything. But I think it's certainly an optimistic industry to be in for sure. So
cool. Samantha?
I feel like a huge theme of this whole webinar has just been like how necessary it is to be comfortable with job volatility. That's come up again and again. And I guess as a final thought along that line, jobs are volatile. And so the danger is that if your identity is in your job, that is where anxiety and panic start to creep in, because those things are always changing and sometimes you don't have any control. And especially for an entrepreneur, like I am my job. So it's hard to separate those two things. But it's, I think, just advice for students especially. Coming out of academia, you've got this laser focus on what you're doing, and it's important to broaden your focus, figure out all of the different things that will bring you meaning in your life and help you define the person that you are, and your job is just one of those pieces. It's important, but it's not everything, and it will change. So if you think that it is everything, then all of a sudden you've got this existential crisis on your hands, like, who am I, right? Like, am I even a linguist? So I would say that there's danger there, but if you set yourself up with scaffolding that, goes beyond the bounds of your job, you will be successful and you'll have stability and security. So those are my final thoughts.
Wonderful. Sam?
I guess my final thought would be know yourself and know the ways in which you have unique perspectives. Because a lot of the time, I think linguists don't realize how much they need linguistic input, but it applies to a lot of things. Like, I'm the only person on my team who has extensive experience abroad, and I'm a second language educator. I'm not US K-12, but that means that I sometimes have a perspective that they don't have, and that's valuable. So just know what you know that maybe others don't, and be forthcoming with that.
Love it. Brent?
Yeah, I guess my final thought is kind of a soapbox. I think we need to stop using the term leave academia. So this comes up a lot, especially in this context, and I think we framed this webinar as outside academia, which is fine. But especially this phrase, leave academia, I find that factually wrong and also kind of ideologically divisive. So in the fact that I meant it very seriously when I said earlier that I have coworkers that are both coming from academia and also, going into, again, from this, like leaving this job, when I say this verb, leaving this job and returning to a position like a lecture or something like that. And I also have coworkers who actively still go to conferences. I'm, planning to go to LSA annual meeting and still get involved with kind of the research that's going on in the research community. And I think it just, it kind of, using that phrase kind of puts a kind of us versus them, no matter what side of the fence that you're on, that doesn't necessarily need to be there. And so, we're all in this together. We're all language professionals, and we're all trying to, contribute to the world in different ways. So let's build each other up.
Oh my goodness, I can't think of a better way to end than that. David, I know you have some last ideas, thoughts?
Sure, just wanted to thank everybody in the audience for attending the webinar, and many thanks to you, Anna, and to the LSA Special Interest Group on Linguistics Beyond Academia for organizing this, and to all of our panelists for taking the time out of their schedules to share their thoughts about their work in the tech sector. We'll have a recording of this webinar on the LSA website on our YouTube channel no later than tomorrow, and I will let you know when that happens. So thanks again, everybody, for a terrific webinar, and goodbye.
Great questions, everyone. Thanks to the community. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.